Hello, in episode 13 of Airs for Architecture, I spoke with Juhani Pallasmaa, author, architect and teacher, about his life, work, writing and vision. It's an amazing story, told by a remarkable man.
Airs for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Airs for Architecture. I'm talking today to Juhani Pallasmaa, the eminent professor and exceptional writer and architect. Juhani, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm an architect professor. I just had my 87th birthday, and I have been doing everything that man can do in his life. I started out designing buildings, but then I have designed furniture, a huge amount of exhibitions, graphic design. In the past few years, I have designed a perfume for an international perfume company.
Perfume?
I have designed a gold coin for the Bank of Finland, etc., etc. I have always answered yes when I have been asked to do something I have never thought about. That has been my principle.
Yes.
And that also applies to my writings. I have now published an enormous number of texts.
Mm-hmm.
And when looking myself in retrospect, there seems to be a plan. There has never been a plan. I have just responded to requests. And my career has been the path of what I have been asked to do.
Has that given your career a particular character, or have you always tried a sort of, I don't know, a character that is very varied, or have you always been able to apply?
Yes, definitely. I completely unopportunistic career. I have never taken a footstep to achieve something, a job or anything. I've just followed the requests.
That's a rather lovely, a sort of happenstance approach to a career.
It's a very rewarding way of living.
Yeah. I first encountered your work through my teachers at the Manchester School of Architecture, particularly, I think, a man called Rick Dargavel. I do believe it was a man called Rick Dargavel, who was a big fan of Zwerfven and a big fan of Peter Zumthor, and was interested in and around ideas of phenomenology, materiality, tactility in architecture. Another man called Colin Pugh, who taught me as well in my undergraduate studies. And so we came across your writing, particularly The Eyes of the Skin, which at the time, in late 1990s, early 2000s, was an absolutely seminal text for architectural writers. When did you write it? When did you publish it? Or was it the product of a long period of writing?
It was published, if I'm not wrong, in 1983. And it also came about. Stephen Hall was planning to publish a book entitled Questions of Perception. And he invited Alberto Perez Gomez, who was already at that time a friend of mine, and myself, to contribute to the book in addition to his own essay and his architectural projects. And that's where I wrote an essay entitled The Architecture of Seven Senses. And then after that, I was asked by the Academy Editions publishers in London to write a short book, 32 pages of manuscript on a subject I wanted to. And I took half of the essay that I had written for questions of perception. I revised it, and then I wrote another chapter to it, and that's how it came about, rather quickly.
And it was built upon a sort of career since the 1960s, a developing perspective, or was this something that you had sort of always been orientated towards? Perhaps we can get to what the book is, and your approach. But I'm kind of interested in this idea that you've been operating as an architect since 1960s.
Yes.
Did you start off as a modernist? Do you count yourself still as a modernist?
Yes, I was a Miesian.
A Miesian?
A Miesian early on as a student already. And there was a strong Miesian school of young architects in Helsinki in the late 60s and 70s. And we built wooden buildings with a Miesian order, a Miesian sort of classicist echo in its simplicity. That's how I started. And the end of that was a industrial summer house system called Moduli 225, which I developed with my good friend Christian Gulliksen, who passed away 2 years ago. So until about the end of 70s, I was strongly in the rationalist school. But then I taught architecture at the Haile Selassie University in Ethiopia 2.5 years. And my view of the world, as well as view of architecture and myself, changed completely. And also my architecture changed naturally.
Sorry.
So, yes.
No, which direction did it change in? I mean, and I like this idea of your architecture and yourself.
Well,
things.
My architecture turned much richer thematically and materially, and sort of multi-thematic. And I also I became very conscious of the tactile sense. That was my first transformation, to understand the importance of the tactile sense, which of course then introduced new materials and material treatments. That's how my architecture changed rather quickly. I also did a couple of buildings in the countryside where I used natural stones. One would almost say that there was a romantic touch to my buildings. I don't see it that way, because there was also always the rationalist order. It was just ultimate tactility through natural stones that I aimed at. Then 10 years later, 15 years later, I had one of the biggest offices in Finland. I had 50 assistants at that time. And I had rather big projects, a couple of art museums, 2 shopping centers, etc., etc. But all the way, even during my big office, I did things with my hands. I designed a number of furniture, light fittings. I made sculptural objects. My for me, the use of my hands has always been important, and that I think comes from my early childhood during the 5 war years when I lived at my farmer grandfather's small farmhouse in central Finland. There, everyone could do everything. My grandfather gave me the first men's knife when I was less than 6 years old, and I learned to use the knife. I'm saying this because my youth was rather different from the youth today. In a farm life, in those days, none of the adults would have time to tend the children. The children were left alone, and the grown-ups trusted on the children. And I'm very grateful for those 5 years when I was left alone. For instance, I became interested in animal construction and animal life. And then in 1995, I compiled and designed an exhibition on animal architecture at the Architecture Museum, which is rather legendary now. So I'm saying here that one's early childhood experiences can be very decisive. I still think of my childhood at my current age often.
Yes. It's very interesting. I do like this idea of the animal architecture as well. I think there's something about the way that you have engaged with the senses in architecture and perhaps taught a generation of architects globally, I suppose, or guided us towards thinking about a more bodily engagement with the world, which obviously in the high modernist phase becomes abstracted and alienated. We produce works that are sculpturally perhaps quite enticing, brutalist architecture, for example, modernist architecture, but which don't engage us. And this is a problem. This is modernism's great problem, isn't it?
Well, I have really never consciously, how would I say, wanted to make any declarations. I have just done what I find pertinent for myself and my current thinking.
You've never written a manifesto?
Pardon me?
You've never written a manifesto?
I have written a couple of short manifestos, but I have never published them. But my interest in phenomenology is also partly a reflection of my childhood, because at wartime I was watching animals and plants and adults in their work. So I was observing. Everything was observation, and I was looking at child's innocent eyes. And phenomenology has been sometimes called reine Schau, the pure looking. So I practiced pure looking as a child, and I have continued that until my current age.
Yeah.
So I have practiced phenomenology in a way since I was 5 years old.
That's a very nice idea. And this idea of the phenomenological, this idea of the world being, it's the Merleau-Ponty you mention in The Eyes of the Skin.
Well, I mentioned him practically in each one of my essays and lectures because he has been so important for me.
In what way?
It's a great pity that he died so young.
Yes. So this idea in Merleau-Ponty's thinking, which doesn't necessarily directly, well, it doesn't directly reference architecture, is that the world is a sort of world in the making. It's a world that it reveals itself through the senses in a
Yes.
like a unrolling kind of way.
Yes.
And your architecture then responds to this too.
Yes, I believe so. And for me, in architecture, I have measured and thought of architecture always through experiencing architecture. As I said earlier, I began with Miesian strict order and a kind of a historicist classical echo in this order. But even then, I was mostly concerned with the thing as experienced, and it is this emphasis on the experience that I regard central, and that also unifies my design work and writing. Both are based on intense experience, and that is why when I stopped designing 13 years ago, I have the genuine feeling that I didn't stop making architecture. I'm just now making architecture through words by describing experiential architectural situations.
You talk about architecture as life enhancing and the way that it kind of adds to the natural world to a certain extent, that it is that we become sort of participants in the construction in the making of the world through architecture, which I think is a very elegant idea, and it's certainly a challenge, I think, in recent years, certainly since I've been learning about architecture. Much of the way that architecture is described as something that is antithesis to nature. The point of architecture is shelter. The point of architecture is a sort of it's a sort of anatural kind of thing that we do. And this has fed into a narrative about architecture as being somehow, in a way, a slightly awkward interpretation of it as something that is, in a way, bad. That modern architecture is not a good thing because it has no correlation, no synthesis with the natural world, which might come from a shift in the way that we understand ourselves as human beings, as being sort of alien forces on the world, and the pressures that we place on the world being somehow avoidable if we simply didn't exist. And I was wondering where does this idea of the enhancing quality of architecture, like how do we go about understanding this a little bit more in your work?
For me, architecture is, first of all, it's everywhere in the human world. And for me, it is not outside of us. Architectural structures and constructions, ideas, they somehow formulate our image of the world. Architecture mediates between the non-human world and human world. And also, very importantly, architecture gives us a sense of time. It is the most important means of getting to contact with a deep past. And so I see the task of architecture as a mediation. I call it a mediating art form. And that is why its theory and understanding is different than for the persons who think of architecture as the end result. For me, architecture just mediates more important things. Merleau-Ponty has a nice line where he writes that we come to see not the work of art, but the world according to the work. And this defines architecture exactly to me.
Mm-hmm.
So the mediating capacity is the essence of architecture. And as I said, it suggested it mediates also in terms of time.
Mm. And between species in a weird kind of way as well.
Between
species.
Yes, surely.
But you have your work from Thinking Hand, and also from the Eyes of the Skin. Your critique stands in relation to modernist architecture, or architecture more generally, as being what you call occularcentric, focused on the eye as the sole or the primary principal medium by which we assess its value, we produce it, we understand it. I'd quite like to understand that a little bit better. What do you mean? What do you mean by occularcentric, and how do we see that being played out in architecture and architectural practice, design?
Not in my view, not only architecture is occular-centric. The modern culture, especially Western culture, is highly ocular-centric. And until the Renaissance time, roughly, sounds and smells were most primary senses in the human world. It was at the time of the invention of the printing, when the process of becoming an increasing process of becoming more and more fixated to vision happened. And of course, current numerous inventions, still have speeded up this process of becoming fixed to the eye. And what is important to me is to notice that we have become fixated to the focused eye, whereas as biological beings, we are primarily creatures of peripheral vision, simply because danger comes from the periphery. The danger cannot be first seen in focus. It is first seen through unfocused vision. But this also has an implications on architecture. Architecture has become quite sharp-edged and precise, simple imagery, etc., which address focused eye, whereas the periphery is not acknowledged.
Mm.
Only a few architects like Alvar Aalto and Sigurd Leverens, etc., of the classical age, modernist age, they were interested in peripheral vision, and that also makes the architecture very inviting and somehow mystical in a positive sense.
I mean, how does this play out? I like this idea of the trying to preference the peripheral, which I think is as a metaphor can be applied to a lot of other things. We could apply it to economics, for example. That wouldn't be a bad idea. And we could apply it to culture more generally. How is this revealed in built? Like, what does this precision, this oculocentrism look like? Does it look like Miesian architecture, very precise lines with a kind of hierarchy of spaces focused around an objective center point with plans that derive from that? And is the opposite of it, and I'm thinking about Aalto here, is the contrast to that something which has a much more complex, hierarchical,
complex, and then it becomes perhaps easier to understand when you think of illumination. Modernity has gone towards higher and higher levels of illumination. It is almost equivalent to the development of modernity, is the high level in illumination. But we have forgotten that high levels of illumination are also used in torture and against humans to break the individuality.
Yes.
Biologically, we are twilight animals. Early humans did not work at daytime simply because they were hunters, and no animals moved in bright daylight. They rested during the day and then started to hunt in the evening when the animals began to move. So we were twilight creatures early on. And this means, yes, contemporary architecture has become so sharp-edged and clear imagery, opposed to vagueness and darkness.
And this leads to a certain sort of selection of materials, doesn't it? I mean, the specification of architecture is then defined by this desire for clarity: steel, glass,
yes,
sharp-edged concrete.
Yes,
and
in a way,
like wood, stone, mud. These get.
Yes, you are right, but it also applies to thinking. The modern man tends to prefer clarity, whatever it might mean in its case, which means elimination of the unclear and emotional and which we can also see as a tragic character of the Homo faber, the man of today.
Yeah, and that way of thinking about things then translates into, again, the way that we produce architectural spaces, which are, as you say, characterized by an incredible quantity of windows.
Yes,
which now that turkey's coming home to roost in the fact that environmentally it's not possible to do it without using huge quantities of oil.
Yes, that's right.
But we also have this way of thinking about the buildings themselves become very sort of explicit. They present themselves in a very gratuitous manner. There's none of this kind of Merleau-Pontian unfolding.
Yes, and no secrets.
No.
Buildings need to be somehow practical metaphors of human memory, simply because we dwell in the buildings, and it is our man-made landscape is a building, a home.
Mm.
Homeness is also something which has almost disappeared. Homes are dwellings, and they are objects of investment, more than finding a place to rest and feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah.
I have written quite a lot on home and the loss of home. Edward Relf writes about, sorry, I have to just answer quickly my phone.
It's out.
Mulla on meneillään nyt just. Yes, Edward Relf uses the notion this phone call interrupted my thought a little bit.
About the idea of home as an investment and the way that we need to reappraise our ideas of
as a monetary investment, but more importantly, social investment to create your position in the society, to market and concretize it.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yes.
And so we end up, well, I mean, the effects of that are everywhere. I was wondering though, as a Finnish person, and Finland to me is a mystery. I've never had the opportunity to go, but I have a mental image of it. Obviously, in the north, it's 6 months of the year is dark, and you get to see the Northern Lights, and Father Christmas lives there, and all of these wonderful things. Has that been very? Do you feel? I mean, I love this idea of you going down to Africa and sort of shaking off in a way the Misesian tyranny of Misesian thinking towards something that's more synthetic, more nuanced and less linear. But has Finland itself played? I mean, obviously your childhood, and you've spoken about your childhood, and I know that you have this holiday home on a lake in an island in Finland. I looked at it on a map, and I was very jealous. Do you feel that there's something Finnish about the way that you think about things? Is there something, or is this a more universal kind of anxiety about modernism and a more universal desire for a better architecture?
No. The older I get, the stronger I feel my Finnishness, and the more important certain aspects of Finnish landscape and culture and history and the way how people behave becomes. Siegfried Gideon, when writing the first essay, his long essay on Alvar Aalto, he makes the point that Alvar Aalto is a Finn, and he takes Finland everywhere that he goes. And this is true. Aalto's buildings in America, on the West Coast, and in France, Germany, France, wherever, they are buildings fitted into miniature Finnish landscapes. They are delightful, but one needs to pay attention to the fact that even the immediate landscape has been exported or imported from Finland. But that just shows how strong the connection with a landscape can be. And in a way, I would say, needs to be. I have myself flown around the globe 108 times. I have been rather mobile, but every time that I have returned back to Finland, I have felt deeper belonging in this setting.
Yes, it's very wonderful, very beautiful. You mentioned at the beginning the idea of the hand, and you've mentioned it a number of times. What do you think it is about the hand and the way that we as designers work with our hands, or the importance of working with our hands, what does it give us that is specific, that cannot be replaced by tools, or particularly more abstract tools like computers?
Well, as I gave my book the title "The Thinking Hand," hand is not only just an organ for making things; it is also an organ to think and have opinions about things, particularly in the material world. And I myself feel that the touch of the things is of extreme importance. For the last 50 years, I would say, in my own design work, when I make drawings and draw a line, I'm not thinking of the line, I'm thinking of the edge and how it feels. And my edges are usually rounded a little bit to be more inviting to the hand. Hand also has a role in the development of language, etc., etc. We tend to think of our brain and intelligence as our most human qualities. I would suggest that the hand has a similar role. Just think of the caressing hand of a mother, or the caressing hand of a furniture maker who polishes the surface of the wood. I have always admired craftspeople and their hands. When I went to the first year of school in the countryside, I had to ski 4 kilometers through the pitch black night to the school through forests.
Are there wolves?
There were wolves, but I passed through by a village smith's small wooden house, and the door was always open in the winter also because it was so hot inside. And I looked and admired at that black man who had huge hands, which were all black. And I just got the impression that he could handle melting metal in his bare hands. So already at the school age, I admired hands and their capacities.
Yeah, for sure. I know how you feel, and I think we're all, particularly us academics, whose hands never see a hard day's work in their lives. Not really. There is something deeply tantalizing about that. Which architects? Obviously, you've reached and had a huge impact on a number of people, a whole generation, I would say, of architectural thinking. Which architects do you think embody this kind of approach, this thinking hand, this tactile? I think it was really you that introduced these words of sort of materiality and the haptic into architectural language. Which architects do you feel have been best at kind of engaging with this? I mean, I suppose a question slightly further back than that is this a form, is this kind of architectural approach you're talking about a sort of advanced form of postmodernity? Is it something like critical regionalism, Kenneth Frampton's critical regionalism? Or are you taking it back beyond that towards tradition, towards indigenous architecture?
I am thinking more in longer periods than postmodernity and modernity. I'm thinking of earlier cultures and ways of life, and the fact that we are living in a society of specialization and narrowing, continuous narrowing of expertise, which we can see in the breaking down of the entire world now in our days, with a capacity to generalize and have overlooks of wider understanding is going down, in my view. And I think we need to go back. And one of the ways of going back would be to engage our entire being in what we do. I think it is a dramatically wrong orientation to make students of architecture work with computers. In most schools where I lecture, I have always say, stop that, and let the students work with computers only after a couple of years of working with their hands. Mm-hmm. After the point when someone has learned to use their hands, and particularly combine their brain and the hands, then the computer probably cannot do that much harm anymore.
Believe you me,
I'm serious about this.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that. And I agree with it. I think that I intuit that. I did my undergraduate by hand. I did my postgraduate on the computer, and I remember one of my tutors turning up at a different architecture school, turning up for a crit, for a review, and looking at my drawings and said, "What happened to your hand drawings?" To which there was no answer. I mean, my architecture didn't get any better. It certainly didn't get any better, but I could produce more of it. So yes. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. But this question about who do you feel kind of, which contemporary architects, if we're looking, or architects of the recent decades, if we're looking for someone to kind of, other than your own work, embody some of the teaching that you have spent so much time doing, who would you say?
Many of these architects that I appreciate most have been very close friends of mine. Stephen Hall, for instance, I just admire his capacity to keep on inventing all the time new approaches to design tasks. Glenn Murcutt is a superb architect. We have named each other a brother, so we are that close. Peter Zumthor, of course. But then there are also several really good architects in China who have been able to bring a new materiality and depth into their work, and also tied Chinese traditions into contemporary architecture. Well, I could easily name 2 dozen or 3 dozen, or whatever number, architects whom I trust, in the sense that they are on the right track.
Doing their best.
Many who are just business oriented, and I can't tolerate an architect who is business oriented.
I guess the question, for me, that modern architecture is very cheap, it's very economical. Is there a cost implication to taking your approach to architecture? Is it more? Is it more expensive? Do you know what I mean? It's like, why are we not doing it? If the approach you propose produces better buildings, happier people, more productive, more content, why do we not do it? Is it to do with just cost? Or is it a change in imagination? Are we a different people? And is your architecture really dependent upon becoming something different as a Western people, becoming a different animal again, reverting to something?
I think all these aspects of life and work and values are related, interrelated. So an architect is, as a person, usually what she or he does as a creative individual. I can't see that those aspects of personality can be distanced too much from each other. That is why I also feel that it is important to particularly for a teacher, to be understanding and behave well and supportively. I have seen professors around the world who just break the student's ego. I almost get tears because that's not the way to behave, and at least the way to teach. The architectural profession has adopted rather strange norms of behavior. Also being arrogant, which has been particularly characteristic to the more successful architects often, is something that I have difficulties of understanding and accepting.
Is the thinking hand approach, is this one of humility? Is that what you're saying? That the architect has to be humble in relation to time, place, history, personhood, all of these things?
Yes, absolutely. And also, I don't believe that at all in my own case that I have that I know something. I'm learning constantly and changing my views and opinions constantly, simply because the reality around me is changing. I believe that some sort of emotional and intellectual and social flexibility would be needed in the architect's world.
Yes. I understand that indeed. Just one last question. How does one go about, so going back to this idea of anti-oculocentrism, what is the design process involved in an anti-oculocentric building? Where do you start and how does it develop?
To always think of the object or room or place that you are designing as an entity, not focus on your drawing. Always be sketching the experiential reality, not a line drawing. And I think it's not difficult early on in one's studies to make this shift from placing your consciousness on the drawing and then shifting it to the reality of the thing, not only its material reality, but also its performative reality being used, and then eventually developing a sensitivity to the emotions that the thing might how would I say, stimulate. I'm here again coming to the central role of experience and the central role of first person position.
Which is to say, the architect must be an empathetic person, that empathy plays a significant role, which I do believe it is very difficult through technology, through computerization, to be empathetic because it's so abstract. And because we as architects spend so little time actually speaking to the people that have to confront our buildings.
There are now very interesting studies on empathy among animals. We have believed that empathy is something, a human quality. No, it's in biological life. It's a strategy or skill of existence through coexistence and empathy. Altogether, I think that biology has become more and more important also for the architectural profession, simply because we are all millions of years old. I tell my students always that you are millions of years old because we are products of evolution that is still continuing. We are thoroughly evolutionary beings. But that is not so often thought about in architecture, which also brings the importance or points at the importance of time. We overestimate the role of space. I in architectural work, I have even stopped using the word space, because space for me is an abstract notion in the science of physics. It's not an architectural notion at all. In architecture, we deal with place. And place is something that is defined by material presence. Altogether, we need to step back from the path towards increasing abstraction and intellectualization. I don't believe that I'm an anti-intellectual, but I'm critical of intellectuality, including my own, and I try to resist its negative consequences.
I think we'll stop there. Thank you so very much, Juhani. That was very wonderful to hear you speak.
Thank you. All right.
All eyes on him, to quote the late great Tupac. Thank you to Juhani for the wonderful and utterly unexpected privilege of getting to speak with him. It was a most generous thing. The Eyes of the Skin should be on your reading list, and there's a link to it and a thinking hand in the podcast description. If you want more thoughts on Juhani's inspiration, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, you might listen to an earlier episode of the podcast from Series 2 with Jonathan Hale. Thanks for listening.